Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's interview with Amma Marfo. According to Amma's LinkedIn profile, you are a persistent creator for hire. You're a writer, you're a speaker, you're a trainer, and a digital marketer. But a fun fact that is not on your LinkedIn profile is that your record for hula hooping is 51 minutes. Tell me a little bit about that, please.
So I'll say that I know the length of time because I was watching an episode of Nip Tuck, which gives you a sense of like what time and space that achievement took place. And even then, I really only stopped because I wanted to do something else. Like I could have kept going, but I was like, that's enough. And just decided to go do something else.
And do you hula hoop often?
It used to be like a good part of like my at-home workouts. I actually was awful at it, but I coached gymnastics in high school in the beginning of college. Okay. So it became a skill that I had to learn for work. And then I just kind of kept up with it once I kind of moved into a space on my own where I could do that. So that would be my workout sometimes, watch TV and hula hoop.
How fun. What color is your hula hoop?
The one I had at the time, I think was like the sparkly pink. I remember buying it at Target. I bought it and a skip it. I have both.
Oh, wow.
And the woman that checked me out, like at the checkout, was like, oh, it's great that you're buying these things for kids because kids aren't ever playing outside anymore. And I just didn't correct her. I was like, sure, yes, that is very important. Thank you.
For you, because you wanted to have fun.
Exactly.
Hey, let's talk about you as a writer.
Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about you as a writer. What do you like to write about? Wait, let me say, what books have you released? Because I know you're an author as well.
That's true, I have.
Let's talk about your books.
Sure. So I've written 3 books. 2 of them are about introversion, specifically in higher education. One is for professionals, about how to encourage the traits that come along with it in them professionally. And then the second one's for students. So talking about if we're building leadership experiences and involvement experience for students, how can we build practices into all stages of that process that value introversion and don't necessarily disadvantage it below extroversion, which is what we tend to look for, whether we know it or not, when we're looking for people in positions of leadership and involvement. And then the third one came out a couple years ago, and it's about creativity. So how can we find ways to bring creative thought processes, creative event planning, creative budget management, all of those things into the experiences that we're building for ourselves and for anyone that we're working with.
I would have assumed that the last 3 months would have been the best time of an introvert's life. Can you clarify that for me and correct me if I'm wrong, please?
So I will say yes and no.
Okay.
I am very good at being home for long periods of time. And in fact, I've talked to a couple people that were like, what was the last time you went out, like just regular, before everything kind of shut down? I don't remember because I had just gotten back from a trip and just kind of did my regular, you've been traveling for 4 days, just don't go anywhere. So I want to say it was around the 9th or 10th, but I honestly have no idea. It's just something I've gotten comfortable doing. But at the same time, the way that I typically work, I work from home, I've been doing it for years when I'm not traveling, became harder when everybody else also started working from home. Because then it was like, oh, well, you're home, can you do this thing? And it's like, well, no. I take time to like work for a little bit. I'll take some time for myself and build in those breaks. And those breaks are harder to come by now that everybody's working the same way and feels like they have access to all of your time. So there are challenges to it as well.
You've mentioned to me before that there are 3 myths about introverts. Do they play into this a little bit?
They do, yeah. So the 3 myths that I talk about when I'm trying to explain introversion to people as it really is and not what they assume it to be is the myths of solitude, the myths of silence, and the myth of separation. So briefly, the solitude one is about the idea that introverts will always choose to be by themselves, and they're doing so because they don't like being around other people. The one about silence is the fact that anytime you're in a situation where they're not speaking, they're either choosing to not participate in the situation, feel like they're above it, or just don't have anything to say. And then the myth of separation is the idea that we have this sense of things introverts can do and things extroverts can do, and that they don't tend to overlap very much. But like you said, when there are myths, there are truths on the other side of those. Okay. So for the myth of solitude, I think about it as a tool in the introverted toolbox that gives you the opportunity to come back to your full level of energy after it's been taken out of you. So as an example, I do a lot of speaking. I travel all the time and I'll speak to really large groups, and I love doing that.
Right.
but I'm not great at the questions that come right afterwards because I am exhausted. So like taking that 10 minutes by myself, that's
Yeah.
not, I don't want to answer your questions. I don't want to talk to you. That's give me 10 minutes to come back to my full level of power and I will be much more useful to you when I've had that time.
Would an event like this, the one-on-one, with me asking you questions, is this an example of you might need to re-energize post-conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. And the camera piece kind of factors into that as well. Because if we were having a face-to-face conversation,
Right.
it behaves just a little bit differently.
Okay.
So I'm asking people as they start building in opportunities for people to stay engaged on Zoom, where we're going to be living for the foreseeable
Right.
future, give people the option to turn their cameras off if they don't really need to be on. Or if you're scheduling meetings where people might need to be in back-to-back-to-back things, give them 15 or 20 minutes where they can step away from their computer and do something else. That's a really valuable thing to give people. And no, it's not going to be the same recharge of like 2 hours or even like a nap or something, but it's a little bit of break where they can get themselves back up to where they need to be.
Right. So as facilitators, we should not misinterpret somebody's camera being off as them being disengaged.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of having to dispel myths about introversion is really kind of disrupting that type of assumption. So what do we automatically think when somebody has their camera off? And understanding introverted behavior sometimes comes about thinking that might not be the reason. There might be something else going on with that person. And it applies to this, but it applies in so many other ways. Like we're in a really difficult time mentally right now. So I think in honoring that type of practice, it doesn't just help people that are introverts. It helps people who might be dealing with the fact that they're not sure if their job's going to be safe. They don't know when they'll be able to go back to work. Maybe someone in their family is sick.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things
Yeah.
contribute to how we show up in a space. So being attentive to that sort of thing, and even to the next myth with that silence, if someone's not speaking, it doesn't mean they're not listening to you. It doesn't mean they don't want to pay attention. There might just be any number of other things going on. So allowing for those pauses where they can catch up to what's going on in the present and respond, you'll get such better answers, such better participation, such better engagement. If you just allow for the fact that 5 to 7 seconds of silence feels awful in the moment, but it will yield so many rewards.
Is that a way that you engage more introverts in your workshops, is by intentionally giving pauses, or do you have other ways to really engage the entire group?
Pauses are a big one because I think sometimes if you pose a question, even if everyone's seen the slides or heard what I've said, the answer's not always going to come to them right away. Sometimes your brain doesn't always get the thought to your mouth as quickly as you might want it to. And for extroverts, that's typically not the case. Their brains work differently. There's scientific proof behind this, where the neural pathways that those thoughts are moving on are shorter. So for people that are introverted, it literally takes the thought longer to come to their mouth. So I like to allow for that space, because when they do tend to speak, it's often wonderful stuff, but we just don't give people the time for their brains to get there.
Mm-hmm. As a kid on the opposite end of the spectrum, I am fully aware that my distance between, if you were to ask me a question, I would probably start answering the question even if I was incorrect. So the energy is very interesting. So it's really helpful for me, and I think probably for other facilitators and advisors, to be aware of leaving the space and giving folks time to think about answering a question.
It's fine.
No, I was saying, I was wondering if that in the silence. Well, I didn't have a thought either, so that helps. I was talking about my own brain. See what I was telling you about earlier? Like I was like, oh, it's gonna be more of a conversation. Because I'm like,
Which is fine. I think that could be effective too.
It is funny. And the third myth of introversion.
Sure. So the third myth is separation. So the idea that there are things that introverts can do and there are things that extroverts can do, and rarely do they intersect. And I don't really find that to be true in a lot of cases. I think that for anything that you're trying to get better at, that you're not naturally inclined to be good at, the more you practice it, and as you step yourself up to the challenge of meeting maybe the highest version of it, it's going to get easier. Like I was a long distance runner for a long time. And I remember the first time I tried to run a mile and it was awful. Like I was the typically third to last or second to last runner in cross country for 2 years in middle school, but I was always like, I'm not last, I'm not worried about it. But yeah, so like over time, the more that I practiced, that mile became easier, and then 2 miles was hard, but then it got easier, and then further and further until I was able to do half marathons. Not fast, but I finished. And I think anything that you want to get good at that takes a lot of energy out of you because you don't have the muscle memory built up yet can get easier. So even public speaking is something that people always assume introverts will never want to do. But for me, and I know for other people I've talked to, speakers, even comedians who identify as introverted, it's the best time to express your thoughts because you've practiced, you know what you're going to get to talk about, you have the time to explore, and people aren't allowed to interrupt you. And that can be really, really valuable. But we always think like, oh, that person's really quiet, they're not going to want to talk. It's like, no, I have things to say. I just want the opportunity to be able to do it in a manner that fits how I want to be able to talk. And again, practicing that over time from small groups to bigger ones, it got easier and I got better.
When you talk a lot about energy, when you're facilitating an event and you're reading the energy, is it easy for you at a certain point to say like, I recognize that this is a person a lot like me, and I'm going to give them more time and space, but you just told me about the building that muscle. Right? How can we as facilitators encourage the introverts in our sessions to do it with, and is there a language that we can use to invite them to participate, to invite everyone to participate?
Well, one of the things that I talk about when I mention strengths of introverts, it's asynchronous communication. So something like, for example, we're speaking in real time right now, you and I. So you speak and then I have to respond in kind, more or less in a timely fashion. Zoom delays and the internet sometimes mess with that a little bit, but for the most part, there's a pacing that's assumed of this conversation. But introverts tend to be really good in asynchronous conversations, wherein you start something, you can think about it a little bit, maybe write it out or post it online. It gives you that extra time, like we talked about, for those thoughts from your brain to get to where they need to go. So one of the things that I really like to incorporate is there's a minute or two where we'll have reflection in sessions, and people who might not be able to come up with what they're going to say, write it out beautifully. And giving that space too to say, you can contribute by writing this down, and that's going to be weighed in equal measure as someone who shot their hand up right away and knew exactly what to say. Both of those things count. Both of those things let me know that you've got something out of what we're doing.
Do you ask all the groups to write the answers as well, or do you just say it as an option?
I typically do a little bit of each. So there will be parts where if you do have something to say or you've been thinking about it, especially if you've had the opportunity to prepare beforehand, which is another tip I give people, sometimes people will come in and know exactly what they want to say. And that's awesome, and I love that. But sometimes if it's a little bit more difficult of a concept, I'll ask everybody to write it down, because sometimes that's something that extroverts need to flex muscles on. So it kind of challenges everybody a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned comedy. What is your connection to comedy?
Gosh, I have a couple different connections to comedy. So my parents are hilarious people. So we grew up in a really funny household, watched a lot of comedy, came to really appreciate it a great deal. And then in the last several years started to take classes on sketch writing and then later stand-up comedy. It's been a really good way to kind of flex writing muscles, because it's so different from the other type of writing that I typically do, but it makes that other writing better, which I really like. It makes it concise, it makes it engaging, it makes people laugh at it a little bit, and that makes it easier to stick with. So I really like that I kind of added that to my repertoire. And then I got dared to take a stand-up comedy class almost 3 years ago now, actually. And loved it, had so much fun with it. And I remember telling people, like, we have our showcase for class, I may never do it again. And that turned out to not be true. So now on a semi-regular basis, less so now because everybody's indoors, but I get to write jokes and then go out and tell them to people. And it's a fun hobby. I'm okay if it never becomes like Netflix special or like Comedy Central show level. It's just something I like to do, and it makes so many other parts of my life better and more fun.
Yeah, but have you been incorporating it into your keynotes as well?
I have a little bit. I have some topics that I do that are specifically about why humor matters when we have conversations and work in groups, and how it engages people as leaders. It's actually given me some tools that have been helpful for engaging people when I'm doing online sessions. because Zoom comedy is hard. You can't hear people laughing, so you have no idea what works. But one of the things that I've found is some of the best experiences that I've had with that have had norms set from the beginning about this is how you behave in this space. So things as simple as like muting your sound so we can't hear it feeding back when we're performing, or making sure that like if you do try to heckle, there is a consequence to that sort of thing. And I find that setting those norms is really helpful because people can come into spaces knowing what to expect, having a sense of what's acceptable and unacceptable. And that sometimes includes putting rules out that people might assume didn't exist. So for example, if somebody can turn their camera off and still be deemed engaged, I would love to know that at the beginning so that I didn't feel like I had to be sitting there a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit exposed. If I had that option, I would love it if someone told me that up front. So I like that there are some really good comedy experiences that are setting those norms at the beginning. And I think we all should be doing that as we're inviting people into trainings or keynotes or meetings that are happening in this online space. Sometimes the norms that we have in person don't translate. So let's talk about what we're actually here doing and what it looks like to be attentive, be engaged, and be prepared to exist in this space.
Right, to set, okay, I got you. So set some standards as people enter the room or even before they enter the room, what the expectations are so that everybody can, and also to forgive someone if they don't feel like doing all the things that are expected.
Exactly. It lays out the expectations in a really open way from the beginning.
Right. But it's interesting if you were to ask the introverts, if somebody whose camera was off, you know, as a facilitator, you say, "Oh, are you an introvert? Is that why your camera's off?" That's not a question that's fair to ask, right?
I mean, I suppose you could. They may not even really be able to identify it. I think sometimes asking questions like that kind of assumes that the person knows, and they might not. I didn't know. No one had ever explained it to me until I was probably in my mid-20s. I just thought I got really tired around people. I did not like them, but I was exhausted after being around them, and no one ever told me why.
Right.
So I think sometimes just being able to say, like, I see that you need this. Is it an easier experience for you having that? So it's a different type of a question, but it gets at the idea that this helps me participate in a way that works best for me.
So in your comedy workshops that you took, you've also mentioned that you've learned some elements of those workshops that would really be helpful for advisors and folks in higher ed. Just simple tools that you've taken with you.
Yeah, I think that I've talked to a lot of comedians about whether they're pro comedy classes and anti comedy classes, and there are people on both sides, and they're both very passionate. But what I will say that I got most from taking comedy classes is the chance to spend an extended amount of time with people who had the same goals, and we could work to make each other better. So I think in this time when we are kind of participating with groups en masse, and you have like 40 people on a Zoom and you're trying to engage with all of them, trying to build sustained relationships with smaller groups. So maybe you do breakouts, and the groups and the breakouts over the course of a semester are the same every time. Those people are going to get to know each other, and they're all going to get stronger because of it. So I think about how to build in those types of spaces where even as we are trying to make sure we get a little bit of time with everybody, that some of those group connections are sustained and done in a way that everybody comes out better as a result of them.
Well, that's a neat idea to always send I'm thinking breakout rooms right now, is that you were saying over time, let people reconnect with the same small group. Whereas some facilitators would say, like, let's do random breakout groups for this next 3 days. We've got 300 people attending the conference. Let's give random breakout groups, but it's almost like you have a home base. It's like like a homeroom class, right? So you get to go back.
It's kind of like the homeroom class. And again, that gives you a sense of comfort. For those who kind of have a hard time making those new social connections, the prospect of being with 3 new people every time you did it, it might not necessarily be scary, or you might not necessarily be afraid of it. That's a little bit different from introversion. That's shyness. But at the very least, going into a space where you know the energy of the people around you, that takes a little bit less out of you every time. So you're a better, more energetic version of yourself for having that type of consistency.
Right. Because you're entering into a space where you're more comfortable. That makes complete sense. Hey, what was the first concert that you ever went to?
Are we counting like preschool entertainer concerts or like adult concerts?
Oh, heck yeah, preschool. But then we'll ask you about the adult stuff too. Okay,
so I believe my first ever concert, preschool entertainers included, is a Canadian group called Sharon, Lois, and Bram. So my sister and I were born in Canada. We lived there for a couple years. So they were kind of like I'm trying to figure out if like a co-ed Wiggles is a better thing versus like a Peter, Paul, and Mary, but for kids, like whatever that is. But it was Sharon, Lois, and Bram, and they like sang songs for kids, like same era as Raffi, that type of thing.
Right, but you got the Canadian trio.
Yes, yes,
That's
I did.
very cool. That's fun. Other Canadian trios that totally rock. This might be a joke just for myself. Rush is my favorite Canadian trio.
That's a joke for me too. They are also quite good.
Okay. All right, so now let's go to your adult concerts.
Okay, first adult concert was Hanson in Orlando, Florida in 1997.
Hey, that is so cool.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And then 1997 though, did you buy the ticket or did your parents buy the ticket?
My mom bought the tickets and she had to drive us to Orlando, which was about an hour and a half from our house. So we left school early that day, which was like a big deal because my parents were very much like, you go to school every day the whole time unless you're like actively vomiting when it's time to go. We never missed school, but we got to miss a half day to go to Orlando. So it was a huge deal. And my sister and I actually saw them live again about 2 years ago because they wrote like a strings orchestra type symphony thing. So they did it with the Boston Pops, and it was like a mix of songs they'd written for that with like orchestral versions of the songs that we all know. And it was just so cool to see them later, but in like a completely different format.
Well, because they're all parents now, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
The members of Hanson are no longer children.
No, they have their own children. They have several. Some of them have several kids, like probably 4 or 5 each, I want to say.
So that next band that comes out of that family is going to be huge.
Exactly. They're
a 12-piece rock band.
Yeah, they're like building another generation of Hanson. So is it then like Hanson squared or like double Hanson? I don't know the math behind it, but they can make another one at this point.
They could have multiple Hansons. Now, do you have a song other than Mbop?
Sure.
Right? Do you have a favorite song of Hanson's? And I only said if Mbop is your favorite, then I love that song, right?
It's a good catchy song. It gets a lot of bad rap, but it is a good catchy song.
It is a really, really, really cool song. But I mean, like, is there a deep cut, a Hanson deep cut that moves you?
There is actually. So on that same album, towards the tail end of it, there's a song called "With You in Your Dreams" that they wrote like right after their grandmother died, and it's like a really profound song for an 11-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 17-year-old to have written, but it holds up. So like whenever someone like close to me, especially from when I was listening to it at like that part of my life, passed away, I always kind of come back to that. So "With You in Your Dreams," it is track 13 on that album.
Wow.
13.
Look at you. You know it.
I know the whole album front to back. If you were to turn it on right now, I could sing the whole thing.
Well, what if you sang track number 13 right now?
Oh, I backed myself into that. I did. I'll admit it. It's too sad. We're not supposed to be crying on these. It's real.
Can you sing track number 13 with a different sort of energy?
I don't know if I could.
All right, then you can do Mbop if you want to.
You really want me to sing on this?
You don't have to do you don't even have to do the chorus. Just do the first verse and I'll dance.
Okay. So many relationships in this life, only 1 or 2 will last. You walk through all the pain and strife, you turn your back and they're gone so fast. Oh yeah. And they're gone so fast. Yeah.
Keep it going.
Oh, so hold on to the ones who really care. In the end, they'll be the only ones there. When you get old and start losing your hair, can you tell me who will still care? Can you tell me who will still care? They were so young when they did that. That was so hard.
It's so their voices were so like they're just so little, right? Yeah.
They were 14. I am several years older than 14. That was really hard.
That was awesome.
Thank you.
That was awesome. So that was awesome, and you brought the energy was great.
Thank you.
Hey, when's the next time you're doing comedy?
That's a good question. Again, Zoom shows are really odd, so I'm not sure when I'm doing one next. I did get accepted into a festival in New York next February, so if anyone will be in February of 2021, be in Brooklyn, New York, I will be telling jokes then. And hopefully at some point in between, because otherwise that performance is going to go so bad.
Oh, come on. Now, are we talking 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 30 minutes? Like,
That is like 10-minute sets, but I get like 3 or 4 over the
oh,
course of
fine.
that 4 days.
Fine. I'm excited for you to showcase someday as a comic.
Ken is too. Like he's
Oh,
already
yeah,
asked me about it. I'm like,
yeah, yeah.
hold up, man.
Oh, well, Amma, thank you so much for being here.
My
Um,
pleasure.
you are awesome, and I'm excited for all that you're doing and all that is to come.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, one more thing. Do you have advice for advisors moving forward? What do you have advice for advisors moving forward into the fall of 2020?
So it's a super uncertain time, which is really, really difficult for all of us. And the advice that I'm going to give is be patient. And I say be patient for a couple of reasons. One, students for the most part understand that we don't have all of the answers right now. And if you're patient and kind of let them know that things are coming and you'll update them as things come in, they're going to trust you. Those are the types of relationships that we build. But also actively in engagement situations, also be patient, because for any number of reasons, people aren't going to be able to respond right away. And some of that is introversion, some of that's sensory processing, some of that might be a language barrier depending on who you're dealing with, and some of that might just frankly be we're still in a pandemic and we didn't expect to be. So being patient kind of gives us the opportunity to let people bring the best version of themselves, whatever that might be, to that space, but they need the time to do it and the permission to do it.
Thank you. I have learned a ton from you. You're awesome.
Thank you. Happy to be.
Well, thanks for being here. Let's give each other 10. Boom. Awesome. See you later.
Thank you.